Hey, it's good to be back. If y'all don't know me, I've been here, I guess, 3 times maybe, something like that. Jason live here in town, and Joe and I become friends, and anytime he leaves, not anytime, but when he leaves, sometimes I get the privilege to come and teach, and I told him if he'd just leave town 10 or 12 more times a year, it'd be perfect. And anyway, they're serving in Florida, doing some cool stuff. I've seen them kind of followed on Facebook, and so it feels different being up here. I'd like to be near all y'all, but I spit when I speak, so you guys on the front row are a little bit better off up here. I don't think I can make it quite that far. And look, I just tell you, I talk really fast, and I intentionally did not drink as much coffee this morning, hoping it would dial it down some. But the good thing is we'll be out of here in about 20, 25 minutes, and you guys will be out of here quicker. And so there's a give and take there. Hey, we're going to be in the book of Esther this morning. I don't know that I've ever taught out of the book of Esther on a Sunday morning like this. I like the book of Esther. I'm really intrigued by just the book. It's unique. God is never mentioned by name in the book of Esther, which is kind of a unique deal. And but God is obviously working through the book, and you can see his handiwork. He's working in the background throughout Esther's life, and you can see that play out. If you haven't read the book of Esther, I encourage you to start from finish. We're just going to look at one little small part of Esther today. We're not going to look at how she became queen. She basically won a beauty contest in a sense, and the king said, I like her, and she wants to be, I want to be queen. She didn't really have a choice, and so she's queen at this point, and we're going to kind of pick up and look at her life, and we're going to look at Esther and her response, but also kind of want to look at Mordecai and what kind of the role he plays in it. We're not even going to see the whole thing play out, so you'll have to invite me back, and I'll just pick back up one day in a couple of months when Joe's out again and randomly teach the second half of this. But I didn't want to just run through. I wanted to kind of look at a piece of Esther today, and hopefully you'll be encouraged as I have if I've been studying. So Esther's queen. If you want to go ahead and turn to Esther 4, you can, but she's queen. She's second in command, and thanks for looking up for Esther. And there's this guy named Haman who comes along who is close to her husband, the king. Haman's kind of a big deal in the kingdom, and people have to bow down to Haman. And so obviously at some point, Haman has talked to the king and saying, hey, when I come around, can people bow down and kind of bow down to me, which shows you a lot about the character of who Haman is. And but there's a guy that didn't really like Haman, didn't really like bowing down to Haman. His name's Mordecai. And Mordecai's like, I'm not bowing down to you. And it really gets Haman sideways. And Haman's like, yeah, you will bow down. And he's like, I won't bow down to you. And so Haman has it out for him. If you guys, I like when people listen to me. I like, if you guys are parents, you get this. I like when people obey what I ask them to do. Like with my kids, if I say, hey, go clean your room, I want them to go clean their room. I'm like, hey, go do this. I want them to do that. But, people don't. You kind of get sideways with them. And maybe it's not so much with your kids, but if you're an older sibling, you've had the younger sibling, and you've been left in charge, and your parents are like, hey, make sure they do this, they won't listen, and you've been in a role maybe at work or whatever it is, maybe you're the wife and your husband never listens to you because men just don't listen, and he's not intentionally doing it, just God wired us that way. I don't know why we can't hear anything but sports. We're dialed in then. We know exactly how many passing yards he has and how many first downs in the ranking, but we can't remember to pick our socks up. Okay, I'm just saying it's the fall of man. We can't help it. I'm just kidding, man. We probably should be better, but so the deal is we like people to listen. So Haman is sideways because he's like, look, you have to listen to me. And Mordecai's, no, I don't. And so he says, he gets the king to finally issue a decree that says in X number of days that all the Jews will be killed, all right? So I've been frustrated before, maybe been cut off in traffic, but I don't go to the point that I go kill every adult living male and woman because of it. You know what I mean? That's a little extreme. And so, but literally the entire Jews in this land are fixing to be killed because Mordecai won't bow down to Haman. Okay, so that's kind of the backdrop of what we're going to jump into. And we're going to look at the exchange that begins to happen where you guys know this verse. It's such a popular verse where when Mordecai finally looks at Esther and says, maybe you've been put in this position for such a time as this, but I want us to unpack how we got there, because the deal is that's a verse that I love celebrating, and we think Esther just went into it willingly to do whatever it is, but we'll see that Esther was like, no, I ain't doing that. I'm not going to the king. And we'll see the interaction between her and Mordecai and hopefully learn some truths from it. So if you have your Bibles, Esther 4. I told you I talk fast, sorry. Mordecai told him the whole story, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay to the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai gave Hathach, I think is how you say his name, but somebody has a different pronunciation, you can tell me, a copy of the decree issued in Susa that called for the death of all Jews. He asked Hathach to show it to Esther and explain the situation to her. He also asked Hathach to direct her to go to the king to beg for mercy and plead for her people. So Hathach returned to Esther with Mordecai's message. Then Esther told Hathach to go back and relay this message to Mordecai. All the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king and is in her court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. And the king has not called for me to come for 30 days. This is his wife. Really messed up marriage here, right? And so Hathach gave Esther, it's kind of deer season basically, like you'll see your husband in 30 days. And so Hathach gave Esther's message to Mordecai. So let's stop there for a second. Mordecai gets word, and he's like, look, you need to go to Esther and tell Esther what's going on, and she needs to go to the king. Well, Esther's like, no, I ain't going to the king. If you go to the king without permission, you die, unless he gives you the permission by holding up his gold scepter, right? I have not been invited to see the king for 30 days, all right? I'm not going to see him. There's no way. I'm going to die. I'm not going to do that. Tell Mordecai he's crazy. Now, the crazy part is not in Scripture, but you get the picture. You imagine, like, hey, go to this thing. I'm not going to go to this thing he's probably going to die for. Hey, ain't going to happen. So she sends message back to Mordecai, and let's just, at that point, if I'm Mordecai and Esther, probably the story's over. I'm like, yeah, you're right, that makes sense. Yeah, we're just all going to die. You know what I mean? Like, but look at what Mordecai's response says back to Esther. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther, don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all the Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this. So he sends word back, he's like, look, don't mistake yourself. You're going to die with us. God will still see his purpose too, and God will still bring someone into the picture who will save the Jewish people. But us, we're going to die in the middle of this. What if you were in this kingdom for such a time as this? You think about the way that she even got there. It was just so unlikely, such by chance. It was so crazy. So she's queen now. Like, why would you be queen? Why would God put her in a position? Well, this moment we all know played out is for this moment that God wants to use her to go to the king and through Mordecai speaking through her. But I started thinking, I'm like, what boldness Mordecai had. You know, we look at Esther as being like to celebrate her, and we should. I mean, she does a very brave thing, we'll see, and as it plays out through Scripture. But think about Mordecai for a second. What a man to say, you know what? You know God's speaking to Mordecai. You know God's working through his life saying, look, this is what needs to happen. God's plan is at play here, but Mordecai has to step into the plan. I think so many times in my life, I kind of want to play the Esther role. I want somebody to come to me and say, do exactly these things and God's going to prevail, but I don't want to be the one that would go to someone and say, you know what, I think this is what God's doing, and maybe we should take this path. And I think about Mordecai's life here. When he came back and she said, Mordecai, I'm not doing that, it'd be so easy to say, you're right, that is kind of crazy. I can't believe I ate that last night and I had this moment, this Jerry Maguire moment, or whatever it is. But Mordecai's saying, no, I'm following God, and God is saying this is what needs to happen. So he speaks back into Esther's life and says, look, don't misunderstand something. You're going to die, and we're all going to die, but maybe God's going to use you for something incredible. And I think about Esther's life, and I think about what's fixing to play out, and I think, what a neat moment. But the thing we miss so many times is God began working in Esther's life, in Mordecai's life, long before this moment. We only see God typically work, we only recognize him when the miracle actually takes place, or the big divine moment happens. But God begins working in her life and his life long before this moment. I think sometimes we sell God short for the amount of time that he's working in the background of our lives. The things that we just think are by chance, or the things that are just like, hey, they just so happen to happen that way, or, can you believe it worked out that way? Yeah, we should believe it's working out that way because God's working it out that way. But so many times I miss that. I almost kind of credit myself for doing a good thing. Like, man, I did a good job there. I'm like, no, God's working there. God's working behind in your life to set you up in a position so you will be successful, so you can walk into those moments. But I think, man, what an incredible moment. So let's keep reading. Then Esther sent this reply back to Mordecai. Go and gather all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Have you guys, don't raise your hand because I don't want you like, oh, I did that. Or you feel like bad if you don't raise your hand. But if y'all ever fasted before, don't raise your hand. I want you to look super spiritual. Or just feel bad if you haven't. If you've ever fasted for a period of time, it is a very tough thing to do, right? It's hard, all right? If you haven't done it, I just highly encourage you for spiritual gains. Not so you can come back next time I preach and be like, hey, I fasted, it was good, but just to really seek after God and go without. And so when those hurting pains hit you, you're reminded to be like your dependency on Him, and He reminds you to pray and spend time with them. But she says, go find those people and fast for me. Go get the Jews and fast. Do not eat or drink for 3 days. 3 days. Y'all, I can't go without a Diet Coke for 3 days. You know what I mean? If I go without coffee for 3 days, I'm killing people. I'm just telling you, like, you know what I'm saying? There's no way that I'm like, yeah, but y'all gotta do that. I'm like, whatever, 3 days. You go fast for 3 days. Me and my maids, we will also do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Now think about this picture for a second. This is the difference between me and them, all right? I'm like, fine, I'm fixing to storm the palace. The king and I are fixing to talk. That's the way I'd go into it. She said, for 3 days, you fast and pray. We'll fast and pray. And if I should die, I will die. But I know that I'm walking in here. And she wants to be covered by God in this moment. Like, I go in like blaze of glory sometimes. I'm telling you, I go in running hot, and I go in just firing in there and hoping God kind of covers me when I get in the door. You know what I mean? And a lot of times I stop and I'm like, come on, man, come on. You're like, I know I've made a mess of this thing. But for 3 days they fast and pray saying, God, and you can only imagine what their prayers are like, and their prayers are like, for 3 days they're covering this moment to say, you know what? Our entire people group is based on this moment, you going in to see the king. And you could die if you do this thing, but we believe so much that God has called us to do it that it's okay. We're going to take that step. And she says, if I must die, I must die, but I'm going to do the thing that God's called me to do. And we're going to fast and pray, and we're going to leverage our life together, and I'm going in to see the king. You know what? And whatever happens, happens, but I know that I'm stepping into this moment that God's called us to. I guarantee you, when she walked in to see the king, she had a boldness about her and a faith about her and a trust. I guarantee she was scared. All right? It wasn't like, hey, whatever. But she knew that death was possible. But she also knew that God was bigger than whatever situation she was going to walk into. And I think about our lives, like so many times when I have a moment that I've got to step into, I may kind of pray over a meal and kind of throw a little add-on there, a little bonus, like, hey, God, by the way, can you help out in this situation because it's a big deal? But I never sit and stop and spend this kind of moment preparing for what God's called me into. God has called her. He's placed her in this position to save an entire people. You think about the power and the weight of that. But y'all, she didn't choose this. She didn't choose to be queen. She didn't choose to have to go to the king. She didn't choose this thing to happen. God had ordained all of this so that she could be in this place for this time. Esther knows that if she troubles the king and approaches without his permission, she'll die. But she also knows if she doesn't take the risk, her people will die. How many of you guys have ever had a really tough choice to make? Maybe it's your job. Maybe it's marriage or school. Maybe it's tonight, like what flavor ice cream you're going after, whatever it is. I mean, have you guys ever had a really tough decision to make? I know when I have it, the weight of that is so hard. This is tough, but I love what Mordecai tells her. Esther, what if you were put here by God to save us? Could you imagine the weight of that statement over your life? Could you imagine people like, maybe this whole church is dependent on you to go out and to do this one thing so you guys would be spared as a people group. Could you imagine having to walk out of this building thinking the lives of these people depend on my faithfulness and my obedience and my boldness? Could you imagine the weight of that? It blows my mind that God would allow 2 young children to be under my care. All right? I'm like, God, you are crazy. Like, I can't handle this, it blows my mind that people work for me and their paycheck depends on whether or not I blow the whole thing. Every single day, I'm like, God, please don't let me wreck this thing. Like, people's lives depend on me. She had a people group depending on her. A whole people group depending on her. The weight of that on her life. And I think about it, she walked in and said, hey, for 3 days, we're going to cover this thing, and we're going to pray, and we're going to fast, and we're going to be a people that go after this, and if I must die, I must die. The whole book of Esther is a series of what-ifs. While God is doing things in the background, Mordecai asked her, what if this is why you're here? What if it's not my mistake that you become queen? What if it's not by chance? What if that is the reason to save the Jews? A few things really stand out to me in this text that I want us to kind of just mention, all right? The first is that Mordecai has some boldness to ask Esther to put her life on the line. All right? I ask people to go do me a favor, but I've never asked them, hey, will you go potentially die for me? That's a pretty bold statement, right? All right? It's a pretty big deal that he would ask that. I think that we celebrate what Esther will eventually do, but she says no at first. I mean, how many times has God has called you to something, and you're like, yeah, God, I ain't doing that. This morning, my son sang at the church we go to, and the pastors, that they're talking about Ananias when he goes in to see Saul, who later becomes Paul. Could you imagine? Like, hey, guess what? Hey, that guy that kills everybody, hey, go talk to him for me. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, there's no way, God. There's no way I'm going to go over there and spend time with this guy who kills people like me. No, God, I'm not going to cross the street and do that. There's no way. And I think about so many times in our life, God asks us to do things. We're like, God, that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. It's so crazy that you would ask me to do that. In the back of our mind, we know that God's doing it. We're just not faithful enough to step out. We're scared. We're scared because we know in our own strength, we're going to fail. Well, Esther was scared, but she said, you know what? For a moment, we're going to step back and we're going to pray and we're going to go into this thing with boldness and confidence because God is calling us to this. In church, what is God calling you to as a church or individually that you're scared to death to take a step into? But God is saying, you know what? You're scared because you're scared of your own strength. With me and my boldness and my confidence and my provision and my blessing, you shouldn't be scared. Now, you can say it's going to be tough, but you shouldn't be scared because I'm greater than whatever you walk into. So many times in my life, I'm like, I know God wants this, but I don't think I can get there. And God's like, you can't. You can't get there. You don't have the strength to get there, but I do. It's so crazy that we know that, it's like if you went to the movies. I hate when people spoil a movie for me. Like, movies, I love movies. I love the joy and the suspense. Like, I love when they switch and they move like 3 or 4 times. You never see it coming. But you imagine going to a movie and every time you go to the movie, you know exactly how it's going to end? It would just it changes how you watch the movie, all right? Spiritually speaking, we know how this turns out. Like her life, our life, we know at the end of the day that Christ is going to come back and we're going to be a redeemed people, but yet we still live in fear walking through the day because we live in our own strength. And God's saying, look, I've already told you how this thing plays out. You have the power and you have the provision and I have all the authority and heaven and hell can't change that, and yet we still live in fear of us. But y'all, look, it's not the power of us is not what gets us there. It's the power of what he can do, and he's already done. He's defeated death. He's lived on the cross. He went to the death. He defeated death. He's alive today. He's living and active. He's a living God, and yet we still live like he died and never rose again. We live like we serve a God that's dead, who did great things. We serve a God that is alive, that has defeated death in all things. Walk in obedience, walk in boldness, and yet you may die, but you know what? She said, if I must die, I must die, because she understood the prize was him. It was Christ. It was God. It wasn't this life. Mordecai doesn't take no for an answer. Esther has a legitimate reason to say no. How many times did God called you and you had a legitimate reason why you should say no to it? I mean, we can all talk ourselves into saying no to something or into saying yes to something we shouldn't do, right? I mean, I can tell if God said, hey, you may die, I'm like, yeah, but I'm a father. I don't want to leave these kids without a father, God. I couldn't do that. You need to send some young college guy who doesn't married yet, that didn't have kids. He's got a life that didn't count as much as mine. I mean, I have a job. I have a family. I have a house, a mortgage. God, I couldn't do that. So we can rationalize everything to make it make sense. And God is saying, in my world and in my economy, sense is kind of taken off the table. Because you see it from a world standpoint. You see it from the thing that makes sense in the flesh. But God is saying, hey, I see it from a heavenly standpoint. God is sitting, looking over all of creation, all of time, and moving the things to make sure things are happening for us. And we can't see what's going to happen tomorrow, so we sit and stop, and we won't take that step. And God's like, look, I see what's happening there. I'm getting you where you need to be. And we miss out on his blessing. Esther doesn't rush in. She calls for fasting and prayer. And I would say, anytime you feel like God is saying to you something to you, man, stop, fast, pray, spend time, get counsel, have people around you praying. I did fast one time for 3 days, not for spiritual reasons. A friend of mine was quitting his job, and I thought he was crazy. So I was trying to just make sure he didn't just make a big mess of his life. And 4 or 5 guys all said, hey, let's fast for you. And I'm like, and I was the small group leader and a pastor at the church. I'm like, well, I have to say yes, because these guys that have regular jobs, aren't even pastors, are saying yes. I'm like, yeah, man, I'll do it too. And he's like, great, man, I feel like God's called us for 3 days. And I was like, what? I'm like, dude, I was thinking eat supper and not eat again until supper again, which is only really 2 meals. That's the easiest way to fast, because you only give away breakfast, which you kind of do without, and kind of lunch, but you're eating dinner again. But it's 24 hours, so you feel like, hey, I fasted the whole day. But he's like 3 days, and I remember sitting there thinking, this doesn't even make sense. This isn't even healthy. That's why I don't run marathons. It's not even healthy for you to run marathons. You know what I'm saying? It's not. It's not even healthy, And there's other reasons, but that's the one I use because it sounds better. And But I remember about halfway through thinking, God, thank you for this. Thank you for reminding me every single day how good you are and the way you provide for me. And I remember at the end of that 3 days, my friend saying, hey, well, I'm quitting my job and we have nothing. Like, if God doesn't provide, like, I don't know how we're going to pay our house, but I know God's saying quit my job. And I had all the confidence in the world to stand behind him and say, you know what, I think you're right. And I can't help you if it all falls apart. You know what I mean? Like, sorry, you know? But it was just like, dude, we were connected to this moment. But for 3 days, man, all I did is think about him and what he needed God to do. And today, this guy's, God gave him a job, and he's flourishing, and it's just incredible to see how God all aligned all those things. But I also remember how good that meal was after 3 days, too. I went and ate a big old steak and made myself sick. I literally was in the bathroom at the restaurant going, oh, my God, I can't do it. I'm like, oh, anyway, a side story. If you do it for 3 days, don't go eat a big ribeye on top of it and baked potato, okay? Your stomach just can't handle it. And the same thing's true for us, though. The Esther was there for a reason. We are here for a reason. God is not making a mistake in your life. God has you where he has you for a reason. He has you in the job he has you in for a reason. How many of you guys play sports? Or how many of you guys maybe are students in here that play sports? I mean, I think about that team, and I think about that's one of the neatest moments where people from all over kind of get put on a team. But God puts people in those places to be an influence. I remember, if you guys know Ross Mitchell, he was a pitcher at Mississippi State, and my wife owns a boutique, and he ended up working for us at the boutique. It was the weirdest thing ever. He tagged all the clothes and all that, but Ross is one of the greatest guys ever. But I remember him all the time saying, yeah, I'm a pitcher, but my ultimate call is to be a Christ follower on this team. And he changed the dynamic of Mississippi State baseball spiritually. I mean, the guy was just a superstar spiritually. He threw, and his fastball was like 48 miles an hour, and the guy was unhittable. I mean, it was like God's blessing over that guy's life out there. I mean, he literally threw like low 80s, and it was just like this. I mean, he was just but his goal in life was to be a Christ follower on that team. I think about it at your workplace. I mean, you're around lost people all day long, and I'm telling you, you want to run from some of those people. But what if God has you in that place for this moment to speak into people's lives, to be an example? How many of you guys, please don't raise your hand on this one because you may be sitting in the room with them, are a part of a crazy family? Like, to the point that you're like, I don't think we're from the same DNA. You know what I mean? Like, you're so crazy that there's no way we're kin. Like, I don't know where you came from, But maybe God's put you in that family for a reason. Maybe the neighbors you live by for a reason. Maybe everything that God does isn't just by chance, but it's for reasons that God puts us in this church, in our job, on our streets, in our families, with our kids. I started thinking about the other day, I'm like, God could have given me any kid. I didn't go out and pick my kids. He gave them to me, and they're so unique, and I use that as a way to make me not feel bad about what I would say right now, because this morning they were crazy, all right? But they're so unique. Like, my son has dyslexia, and I remember, like, trying to understand that, and I'm not very patient. And with a child that has dyslexia, you need to have patience. And I'm thinking, God is literally allowing me to grow as I work with my son, trying to help him do homework at the end of the day is so challenging. But God gave me this child, and God expects me to encourage him and speak into his life and grow him up and let him be a man that loves him and be an example to him. So whatever it takes me to get there, I've got to be that guy. And so whatever it takes in your workplace to be the kind of guy that people need to see, you know what, maybe you're going to have to take a step like Esther. Hopefully you won't die at work, but you may have to make a choice that's hard, that's tough, that says, you know what, I've got to step into this moment because God has put me here. I don't think as a believer in Christ, God ever I think there's things that just happen, don't get me wrong, but I think God ordains so many areas of our life that we think are just meaningless, and God is saying, no, you're there for a reason. The people that you have in your life are there for a reason. I want you to step into those moments. You may not save an entire lineage of people. You may not save the entire Jewish race, all right, in this area, but you may save a person because you allow them to hear the gospel in God's Spirit. You won't save them, don't misunderstand me, but God may use you so that salvation can come in that person's life because you have the boldness to say, you know what, man, let me tell you about the hope that I found. How about the tailgate? I was walking through campus the other day, and I'm looking around, I'm thinking, man, there is more craziness happening right now on this campus than anywhere in Mississippi. And you don't have to be a weirdo, you know what I'm saying? Like, you don't have to go out there and start yelling and screaming at people. I tell a story one time, or I'll tell you a story about one time we were in Atlanta, and there's a certain wing restaurant, I won't name names, and this guy was on the street corner sitting on a 5-gallon bucket just condemning people to hell, just screaming at them, not the way we should do the gospel. And he has a huge to-go cup from said wing place, you know, and he has it in his hand, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, that don't even make sense, you know what I mean? So we got to be careful that we're not just screaming at people, we love them. You know, Esther went in, and as you see the story, she went to the king one time and didn't feel it, so she called him back to go a second time, and she finally said, hey, king, this is what's happening. He said, who would do that? And she said, hey, this guy would, and the guy ends up losing his life. Haman ends up dying because of what he was going to do. Growing up, I had a buddy, and I'll just call him Tom, okay? That's not his real name, but I had this buddy named Tom, and he tells this story. Tom was bullied in middle school. Tom was a bigger kid, wasn't athletic, and then he kind of grew into his athletic body one day and kind of became like a little stud. He was kind of one of the star athletes on the team. But in middle school, he was picked on, bullied, and in high school, he was kind of the man. He was the deal, you know. And so he kind of understood what it was like to be bullied and not really fit in. So he was in class, and it was his junior year, and he had this class that, you know, I don't know if you were in school where you got stuck with that class you had to have for elective and nothing else worked, and you did not want to go to that class. You know what I mean? It was like that class where you're like, there's no way I'm taking this. And they're like, what's the only option? So he was in that class, and there was a kid in the back, we'll call him Frank. And Frank reminded him of himself in middle school, yet this guy was in high school. And Frank would make fun of himself to kind of make himself feel better, but he got bullied on all the time. And so Tom, over the course of 8 weeks, said, you know what? And he didn't mean for it to be 8 weeks, it just ended up being that. He said, you know what? This guy's going to kind of be my project. Like, I identify with him, so I'm going to invite him to church. I'm just going to invite him to church. And so the course of 8 straight weeks, he invites him to church. He says no every single time. No, I'm not going. No, I'm not going. No, I'm not going. So finally, on the last week, he's like, you know, I'm just not inviting him. I'm sick of being told no. I'm just not even doing it anymore. And so he leaves school. He walking out, and he really remembers he has some of his lockers back when we actually had lockers in school. And I had to go back to my locker, so he went back to his locker, and he saw him down the hallway, and he's walked by, and he's like, I'm not doing it. And he said God's just impressed on him, like, go invite him to church. And he's like, oh, my goodness. So while there, and he's like, look, man, you want to go to church with me tonight? And the guy's like, yeah, I'd love to go. And he's like, whoa, hold on a minute. Like, you were supposed to say no at this point. And so that night, they had this little youth gathering. It was on a Friday night, and guy shares the gospel, and he gets saved. And the next week, they're hanging out before youth, and one of the adults was talking to him, and the guy didn't know how to act in church. He just kind of just told him everything about his life, kind of threw up on him, you know. And he said, let me tell you about it. He said, well, last Friday, I had made a decision that morning that I was going to take my life. And he said, and I remember praying. I didn't know how to pray. I'm like, God, if you're real out there, will you do something? Will you show me you want me to do this? And he said, he came by and asked me right before the end of the day. And he said, he didn't ask me earlier. And I thought, you know what? I knew it, God. You don't care. And he said, he came back and he said something. He said, I knew God was telling me not to do it. And he told that story, and I thought all he did was invited him to church. That's all he did. But God was like, no, you didn't. You were obedient, and I was working for 8 solid weeks preparing him to say yes. And you almost missed it because you got concerned about yourself. What if he wouldn't have asked him that week? Think about the difference. This guy now is a minister serving in a church. You think about his life and the amount of hundreds of people his life's impacted. Because this one guy finally said yes again to just invite him to church. God isn't asking you to save the world. He's already done that. He's asking you to be obedient.